What are hallucinations? Well, hallucinations are a symptom of psychosis. They have many other causes as well, and they're essentially a false sensory perception. So this would be one or more of your five senses engaged with something that's not real. So this affects your sight, hearing, taste, touch, and smell. A really common hallucination that people tend to think of when they think of psychosis is hearing voices. That's a very well-known one. It's also a very common one. You might also see things, like you might see people who are not real or objects that are not real. I tended to see a lot of like imagery, things like colors and fractals. You might even taste things, like you might taste sour tastes or smell burning toast or burning rubber, like the burning scent is very common. Or you might even feel things, like you might feel pinpricks, you might feel like fingers running across your back, you might feel any number of things. They're very, very widespread, and almost anything can be hallucinated. As a person with schizoaffective disorder, I'm very familiar with hallucinations, and I've had quite the variety in my psychotic episodes. I've had almost every single type of hallucination. I have had auditory hallucinations, visual hallucinations, tactile hallucinations, and olfactory hallucinations. I've never tasted anything, but I've had a really large span of experiences. The thing is, I never realized that I'd had hallucinations at all. When I came out of psychosis and was told that I'd been psychotic, I thought you had to be kidding me because I didn't have hallucinations. The thing is that hallucinations are just so realistic that I couldn't tell the difference. Even after psychosis, I didn't realize that my experiences had been hallucinatory because they were just that real. It took me quite a while to sift through my memories and understand what had happened to me and pinpoint the things that weren't real. It's honestly quite challenging to make sense of it after the fact. But over the years, I've been able to look back and pick apart the experiences to realize, oh, that wasn't real. That wasn't real. That wasn't real. And in doing so, I've discovered what my hallucinations were like. So let's talk a little bit about it today. Let's talk about what my hallucinations have been like. To start, here's a disclaimer to say that I am not a mental health care professional, and I am in no way qualified to give medical advice or really any advice for that matter. Who I am simply is a person with lived experience having serious mental illness that's here to share with you the wisdom and insight I've gleaned along the way on my path of mental health recovery. Also, here's a trigger warning to say that the subject of psychosis in its very nature is a sensitive subject and can be at times difficult to talk about. So if at any time during the video you may feel triggered or uncomfortable by what I am saying, you are more than welcome to leave the video. In this video specifically, we will be talking a little bit about bodily harm and gore. So if that's not up your alley, you're more than welcome to leave. Moving on. So like I said, I didn't know that I had hallucinations. I didn't realize that they weren't real. And I think the very fact alone that even after several psychotic episodes, I still didn't believe I'd had hallucinations at all tells you just how realistic they are. They are so realistic that even after coming out of psychosis, you can't tell that they weren't real. Some of the hallucinations I've had, I can only tell are hallucinations based on context. By context cues of things people have said or things that were in my environment, I've been able to look through my memories and discern that that wasn't real. But it is honestly so hard. And even 10 years after my first episode, I'm still looking through my memories and understanding what was and wasn't real. It's that challenging. I still can't tell. Part of the reason for this is just that a lot of hallucinations are ordinary. They're things that could actually happen. They're real things. A lot of my auditory hallucinations were really simple things, and the way that I can tell that they aren't real is only through, as I said, context clues. For instance, one of my very first hallucinations was of a car engine revving, and I would hear this when I'd be walking, and I would look behind myself to see if there was a car revving up behind me, and there wasn't. So that's one way I was able to tell, was that there were no cars on the road behind me when I was walking. However, in psychosis, this is just such a realistic experience that I would always have a reason for why it was real. Like I'd think that it was a spy who'd pulled over really quickly and turned off their headlights. So there were always reasons for why that made sense. And so I would hear things like the car engine revving, I would hear like doorbells, and I would hear people, but they were never talking to me. They were always talking to each other. So it kind of felt like I was in a crowded room, like I was surrounded by people all the time, but I was the only one there. You know, that I think looking back is really obvious, but again, in psychosis, you just can't tell. With the symptom of anosognosia that basically takes away your awareness of your mental state, there's so much logic in psychosis that says, well, of course that makes sense. Why wouldn't that make sense? Everything makes sense when in fact nothing makes sense. So hallucinations are just so easy to believe that you wouldn't doubt it for a second. So yeah, there were the ordinary hallucinations that just made sense because they were kind of like everyday things. You know, hallucinations don't have to be big and flashy. They don't have to be completely bizarre. They can just be pretty much everyday things, which in itself is kind of hard to tell when it's something that you're used to in your everyday life anyway. But then you have really bizarre hallucinations, the kind that you'd think of like in movies and stuff that are just so outlandish and so hard to believe. Like you'd think anyone would be able to tell that they weren't real, right? Well, even with the more bizarre things that seem like fantasy, that seem like made up, you know, I still couldn't tell because again, in psychosis, I believe in everything that's happening. My mind has told me that this is all true. But coming out of psychosis, my mind would have a way of sort of dismissing things and telling me, oh, that was your imagination. Oh, you just made that up. That never actually happened. You're just adding things to your memory. Like I had this almost like a survivor's skill of being able to deny what had happened. So when I would have memories of things that were very obviously not real, my mind would rationally change that thought into, you're just thinking that up. Like you made that up. That was never a hallucination because you're making it up in your mind. For instance, there was this one time that I had just taken off wandering in the middle of the night. This is something that I'm very prone to doing in psychosis. It's also very common with dementia, where people will just leave and go wandering and they have no destination in mind and they don't really know what they're doing. They just kind of take off. So I did that a lot. And when I would be wandering, it would be like 3 a.m. and I'd be on the side of the road and I'd just be walking for miles. So one of those times I was walking along this road, well, it was a highway actually, which is a little more dangerous, I suppose. And there was this woman with me and walking like side by side with me for quite a while, never spoke to me, just watched me. And she looked like a nun, but she looked very scary because she had blacked out eyes and blood coming down from her eyes. And she was very ashen and pale and very, very old. And I would remember that and tell myself, you're just like inserting a memory. That never happened. There was never anyone there. You were just imagining that. But the thing is that, how do I have a memory of it? Like how do I remember a person being with me if I'm just like making it up, right? Because it's one thing to like have a memory and then just like project something onto it, but it's another thing to have a memory and then like pull something from it and remember that there was another person with me at that time. So my rational way of saying that didn't happen was saying that I'm adding a character out of nowhere, when in reality, where did that character come from? She came from a hallucination. It really did happen. I still struggle with discerning memories like this, and fortunately, when it comes to these memories of more bizarre things like people who are pouring blood out of their eyes, I've been able to kind of accept that that's not my imagination and that actually happened. My coping mechanism for so long was, nope, no way, that did not happen. But you know what? I've come to trust my mind and accept that whenever I remember something really outlandish, I don't just immediately jump to brushing it off as my imagination. I've accepted that it's a hallucination. I've been able to say, okay, Carolyn, rationally, which is more plausible? You had a symptom of your illness or you're just making shit up? Now that I'm able to deal with today, I can remember things that are weird and make sense of it. The ordinary things though are so much harder to tell, And a lot of times it comes down to like conversations and interactions with people, because when I hallucinate other people, there's no differentiating. They look solid. They look tangible. Like they look like I could reach out and touch them. Now, I've never tried, but they look that real. Like they are so realistic that I didn't know for years I'd even hallucinated people at all. That has to be one of the most realistic things I've hallucinated. I don't know, am I still gaslighting myself? Because sometimes I think I'm still gaslighting myself about this, where I do still question like if that actually was a hallucination, but then I remembered the things associated with those events, and I think there's no way in hell that was real. That is not even possible. And so I'll share with you another example, an example of how I was able to tell for the first time that I hallucinated actual people. So I was in the hospital, I was on the psych unit, and one night in the middle of the night, I just happened to be awake because I usually have trouble sleeping, and there was this man who came up to me in the hallway. I just assumed he was another patient, and he stood there and spoke with me about how he was an angel and how God had a message for me and that there were demons who were going to come for me. All this really weird like psychosis babble, but I totally believed it. The interaction ended and I walked away and I went into the common area of the unit, which was just like this kind of round room, and there was a counter at the front of the room with two staff members who always sat monitoring the unit. So I'm wandering around in this room and he comes in and he's different. He's angry and aggressive and he was storming around, knocking over books. Now, I was so scared that I stood there and I ducked my head down and I let my hair fall in front of my face so that I couldn't see anything. So this is what I heard. I heard knocking, like the books being knocked down, and I heard him like harumphing and whatnot, like making noises with his mouth and just being loud. And then he came up to me and he got right in my ear. And I tell you, I could hear his voice this close to me saying, little girl, look at me, little girl, look at me. It was terrifying, okay? I don't know about you, but if you have some strange, angry angel man like up in your ear calling you little girl and screaming at you, because it got very loud. Hallucinations can be very loud. You know, it was so realistic. So for years, I thought that did happen because that was the most realistic experience I've ever had with a hallucination, hearing the proximity of his voice and the volume. I didn't see him that time, but I saw him the time before and I assumed it was the same man. This was all in one night. And then I realized, Carolyn, if a man, just some man in the psych unit was like harassing you, like verbally harassing you and yelling in your ear, wouldn't the staff who are like right across the room get up and do something about it? Wouldn't they intervene? Like, isn't that kind of their job? If you're being like verbally assaulted, isn't it kind of their duty to stop it from happening? When I realized that, it kind of put it all into perspective. It also explained why I never saw that man again, and why I'd never seen him before that either, and why he said really strange things about being an angel and God messaging me and whatnot. So yeah, it's just, if I don't have those context clues of realizing that staff would have gotten up and like detained this guy, I wouldn't know. I'd probably still believe that really happened. It was terrifying, and in psychosis I did think it was the demon he told me was coming for me, but yeah, none of that was real. It's just that if I didn't have that realization that the staff were there, I wouldn't know. And mind you, it took me like 7 years to crack that code, because I will remember things that happen in psychosis and repeat them over and over in my head. And eventually something will just slip into place and I'll think, wait, I haven't thought of this before, but what about that one thing? And then it makes sense. So this applies to pretty much everything in psychosis. I will just like digest it and think, what the hell happened to me? Like, did that even happen? And then every once in a while, a random thought flies into the equation and says, oh, actually that was a hallucination. What do you know? So that's honestly the only way I can tell. Now that I'm aware of my hallucinations and I've actually been able to tell that they've happened, I've kind of unlocked so many memories and been able to make sense of them. Like, be able to make sense of things that I couldn't explain at the time. like seeing dark, ominous clouds just hanging right in front of me, and realizing that that wasn't an evil entity, that was just a visual hallucination. Or just being in the car and driving along and smelling sulfur. I wasn't driving into the gates of hell, I was having an olfactory hallucination. So those I'm starting to figure out, and it does kind of give me some ease to know that there's an explanation for these things, because I couldn't understand before the dark ominous cloud or the gates of hell. Like, I couldn't understand that, and now I do. It was a symptom of my illness. So being able to identify these hallucinations has been huge. And I've also been able to like kind of make a catalog of the experiences and be like, wow, this is like a really wide range of things, because I've had anything from feeling fingers running up and down my body to seeing like visuals, like kind of like fractals and these colors and like really beautiful imagery. And I've been able to just kind of put in order from like most innocuous to most bizarre everything that's happened to me. And I gotta say, like, some of the more ordinary ones are just kind of funny, you know? Like, I would hear a doorbell ring, and in psychosis, when I'd go to check the door and there'd be no one there, I'd get angry thinking that someone was playing Ding Dong Ditch. Nope, it was just my mind. My mind was playing Ding Dong Ditch with me, but that doorbell never actually happened. Unfortunately, a lot of the bizarre ones are really dark. I have schizoaffective, which means that I do tend to have depressive episodes with my psychosis. And when I'm in psychotic depression, the hallucinations have a much different nature. So when you're in a depressive episode in psychosis, I don't know, man. It's really hard. It's really dark and traumatic. Like the things that I would hallucinate went from being really ordinary things like doorbells and car engines to gore. And I would see violent, horrific things, and they're so realistic that, again, I couldn't tell they weren't real. So I have a lot of trauma from some of the things that have happened in psychosis. And I think that honestly, the most horrific stuff happened in my marriage, because my marriage was abusive. So it was already a very dark experience in itself. And I think this will probably be my final example, but I'm going to give you an example of the dark side of hallucinations, the hallucinations I've had that have been very traumatic. So this was one of the, this might have been the worst one. Honestly, no, I wouldn't say it was the worst. It's hard to pick a worst because everything was so bad. But basically, there was this one night that I was with my ex-husband, and I was awake, but he'd gone to bed. And I didn't know this, but he had started drinking. We met in recovery, so we were both sober when we got married, and he relapsed while I was psychotic, which I didn't know. So I went into our bedroom and saw him lying there on the bed, and I smelled alcohol on his breath. And my mind immediately kicked in and said, that's formaldehyde and he's dead. And all of a sudden, when I looked at his body, it had been like chopped up. And I know I've said this out loud a lot. Like, I've actually said this out loud, but it still brings back really vivid images in my mind, because it's almost more realistic than real when you're in psychosis. The experience of psychosis is kind of more heightened than actual reality. So I believed that I had hacked him up with an axe, and that's what I saw. I saw him just splayed out just like pieces, like a puzzle. And it was very traumatic, and it was very scary and sad. And I genuinely believed I was a murderer, which is a horrible feeling to live with. And I ran away, and it was really traumatic. And so hallucinations can be really scary, and they can be really dark. And it's not all just fun, you know, I don't know. I don't know what people would think hallucinations are if they've never had them, but they're certainly not like an acid trip. I know a lot of people equate psychosis to an acid trip, but oh boy, that is nothing at all like it. Like I wish it was like an acid trip because that would be a lot more manageable, honestly. No, it was really dark and sad. I know I'm not the only one who has really horrific experiences like that too. I know for a lot of people, most people, psychosis is terrifying. And so I know I'm not unique for what I've experienced. And I recognize that it's probably fairly common to have traumatizing symptoms. Like you're taking trauma away from something that never technically happened. But when I tell you that I saw my ex-husband's body hacked up, I saw it all. Like there was no denying that that was what a dead body looked like, you know? So it's not exactly like your mind playing tricks on you. It is a separate reality. Anyway, I prefer the smaller, more ordinary, fairly neutral stuff, you know? I mean, some hallucinations, like hearing screaming in my head, they're very hard to live with. Like it's really hard to focus when you're hearing people like being tortured in your head, you know? That's another really scary one that I get. And I don't really like to give those examples a lot. Like I talk a lot about my marriage. Anyone who's followed me for a while is probably familiar with that shit show. But, you know, when I give examples, especially in short form videos, like on, you know, Instagram and TikTok, I tend to talk about things like the car engines and the doorbells and the chatter. I tend not to go in depth about the really horrific stuff, the really scary stuff, because it's already hard enough to live with without like re-traumatizing people, which is why I like to put out trigger warnings for my videos, because I know I would want a trigger warning to hear stuff like that. Just my 2 cents. When I started making videos, I had a very different approach because I had been so dismissed for so long when I'd share my experiences with people in real life that I just really wanted validation and I wanted to relate to people. I wanted to find people who'd been through what I'd been through. And some of the stuff I really needed help with, like the really violent, gory stuff, I was looking for people who knew what that was like. And it worked because I met a lot of people who've had just exactly the same experiences as me. And I do mean literally the exact same experiences. But I also discovered that I was kind of spreading negativity and I don't want to do that. And I want to like give people hope. And so by elaborating on the really gnarly stuff that I used to talk about in the beginning, I was just kind of giving, I think, a false image of what I wanted to represent, which was psychosis positivity and recovery and helping people to like live with and cope with something that could be considered the worst experience of your life. Anyway, that's just a little bit of a tangent. I probably will be talking more in depth about that in a couple of weeks. I have another response video to make next week, which I'm really excited about. And then I just wanted to share a little bit of my own perspective about how I've been able to find hope after psychosis. So if you're interested in hearing about the hope that you can find after psychosis, let me know in the comments because I think I'll be making that video pretty soon. Anyway, that's pretty much it for today. I just want to wrap up by giving, I guess, like a little bit of a mental health update, which is to say that I'm not doing my best. You know, I'm pretty sure we're all aware at this point that I have schizoaffective disorder. And for those who don't know, schizoaffective disorder is 2 disorders in one. It is schizophrenia and a major mood disorder. In my case, that would be bipolar disorder. And every once in a while, in the couple of years I've been making videos, I've had mood episodes, and I'm afraid to say that I'm coming into another one. I've had 2 manic episodes, or rather hypomanic episodes, since I started making videos, and now I'm going into depression, which I'm aware of, so at least there's that, but it's not fun. It's been really disheartening. I'm not too thrilled to be going into depression, but I know how to handle it. So I just wanted to put it out there that, you know, when you have mental illness, like even on medication, you can have breakthrough symptoms. So for me, I don't have psychotic symptoms anymore, but I do get mood episodes, and they're relatively mild compared to what they used to be, but they're still really hard to live with, as anyone who's had depression knows. So I may or may not be taking somewhat of a break. I think I will continue making my long form videos every week, but I think maybe I'll slow down on the short form ones. I don't know. I just gotta ride it out. I think of it like a cold, you know, where you just treat the symptoms and you do your self-care and you rest. I just really am not looking forward to the next few weeks. That being said, it's time to wrap up this video. Thank you so much for watching. I truly appreciate it. Today's video topic was a bit of a collaboration between me and my friend Red Sundark over on Instagram. We recently did an art piece together all about hallucinations, which we've both posted to our Instagram pages. So if you'd like to go check it out, I will link to his Instagram account in the description box below. Be sure to give him a follow while you're there. And also let me know what you thought of this video in the comments. Can you relate? What are some of your hallucinations like? You can also support my channel by liking and subscribing, or in other ways, you can subscribe to my Patreon, or you can check out my merch. There will be a cute little reel at the end of this video of all of my merchandise so you can see what's available. I also put out videos every Thursday/Friday, so if you're interested in more content, there's plenty coming soon. I'll see you all in the next one. Bye! Heads up, I have merch! I recently launched a merch shop with fun clothes and other items made out of my own original designs. As an artist, it was fun to come up with art that expressed how I feel about psychosis advocacy and the light I try to bring to the darkness that psychosis creates. Despite the struggles that others and myself have faced, there is a lot of positivity to find in recovering from mental illness, and I hope people will feel positive when they wear my clothes. I've been fortunate enough to recover from psychosis, and I know that I'm incredibly lucky, but that doesn't mean I was okay. For a long time, I felt incredibly lonely without anyone to relate to, and until I found the psychosis community, I truly didn't think there was anyone like me. Now that I'm not alone, I want to extend that same welcome to others and let them know that it's okay to have mental illness, but that they don't have to struggle through it by themselves anymore. I hope I can make mental illness visible enough that people can find a community like I have, a place to belong where they can reach out, ask for help, and get the reprieve they need from mental illness.